Today on BRStv Investigates, is it worth sending in a $30 ICP water analysis test for your tap water before deciding on buying an RODI unit or before you buy new filters for the unit you already have? Whether you're on city municipal water supply or well water, today's testing might save you money and potential headaches in the long run. Hi, I'm Randy with this Friday's BRStv Investigates, where we put popular reefing gear, theories, and methods to the test by experimenting on our own tanks so you don't have to experiment on yours. And in today's experiment, we use CoralView's ICP water analysis test to send out 7 water samples from 4 different city municipality water sources, as well as 3 different well water sources to compare differences and similarities between, in order to decide if a $30 ICP water analysis test kit can help you choose the right RODI water filtration unit, or if you can help you find a new filtration approach for your current system. We get questions all the time from people who ask if they need a more advanced RODI for well water versus city water, or even if they need an RODI system to begin with. And up until now, there really hasn't been a straight answer. So today we plan to change that by answering the question, could a $30 ICP analysis of your tap water help you decide if you need an RODI unit, or maybe, and more importantly for most of you, upgraded RODI filters? Let's find out. Our experiment begins today with 7 water samples that we gathered from a variety of water sources within the Minneapolis metro area and within a 40-mile radius surrounding area. 4 water samples were collected from different treated municipality water sources ranging from river to groundwater, while the other 3 were collected from untreated home well water supplies. We sent in all 7 samples for an ICP analysis report of 40 different elements using the ICP water analysis test kits from CoralView. And today, after a 3-day turnaround, our results are back. But before we get into the results for each water sample, let's take a brief look at the diversity of our 7 water samples, starting with the treated municipality city water. City sample number 1 and city sample number 2 were collected within less than 5 miles of each other, with city sample 1 coming from the BRS tap, which is directly sourced from the Mississippi River, filtered, treated, then disinfected, and delivered to the greater city of Minneapolis. However, just 5 miles away, the city sample number 2 water is sourced from groundwater derived from large wells and aquifers, then is also filtered, treated, and disinfected before being delivered to the tap. As for city sample number 3 and number 4, we collected them from 20 miles south and 20 miles north of BRS, and both sources are also derived from groundwater wells and aquifers. I was actually shocked while researching the groundwater aquifers for these 2 municipal water sources when I noticed that they had a couple aquifer sources in common, even though they were 40 miles apart from each other. This prompted me to dig a little deeper, where I found this map from the USGS of one of those shared aquifers, where the expanse of its reach across parts of 7 different states is pretty amazing when you think about it. We also collected 3 different well water sources, which are untreated sources derived from direct taps into underground aquifers to your home. Our samples for well number 1 and well number 2 were both collected within 5 miles of bulk reef supply, and both near different areas of the same shore of a local lake in the greater Minneapolis, so it will definitely be interesting to see how they compare. While well sample number 3 was collected very close to the Mississippi River, about 20 miles north of BRS, which presumably will have completely different ICP analysis profile than the other 2, but let's find out. Before we get too far into today's results, there are a couple of things we need to keep in mind. The first is that although we can use available ICP analysis testing to provide us with a clearer picture into some of the elements that make up our drinking water, they are definitely not designed, nor should be reasonably interpreted, as the most accurate testing method available. There are entire government agencies in place whose primary role is specifically designed around analyzing the public's drinking water, and if you want to dive even further into the breadth of what those testing methods are, you can absolutely find them on the EPA's website. I don't doubt that the aquarium industry ICP test kits that cost us around $30 or more are a far cry from accuracy and cost that goes into governmental drinking water testing, so we should have some reasonable expectations for the results. Because of that, and for today's experiment, we're not going to try to decipher or speculate as to each element's results and what they mean, but rather the point of today's experiment is to try and draw out similarities and notable differences between our city and well water samples in order to find out if there's a better way of choosing a more adequate RODI filtration approach for your specific water source, or if you even need one to begin with. The ICP analysis kits we used for today's experiment test for 40 different elements, but rather than walk through an entire hour of going through each one, we're going to slim the list down by removing elements that were either not registered or below 1 part per billion for each of the 7 water samples, which includes elements like silver, beryllium, cadmium, cerium, cobalt, iron, gallium, lanthanum, molybdenum, nickel, lead, antimony, selenium, tin, titanium, and vanadium. Along with that, we're also going to slim the list down by skipping over the elements that are present or in some cases even desirable in seawater, such as calcium, chloride, potassium, magnesium, manganese, sodium, and strontium. So after pulling out those handful of elements, we're left with 17 to explore today. So with that, let's get started with our first element, aluminum, where we can see that each of the 7 water samples registered very small amounts, none of which were above 3 parts per billion. Arsenic is next, where again we have super low levels below 2 parts per billion across the board, with 3 having 0. 2 samples, both in city and well water, had boron levels up into the 6 parts per billion range, yet overall each sample tested relatively low. With barium, we see levels in the tenths of a part per million, but nothing really much higher than a quarter of a part per million, and the BRS City Sample 1 was the lowest, registering at just 2 parts per billion. Bromine is next, where we see a wide range of results from 0 to 10 to as much as 40 parts per million, all within a 40-mile radius. Probably one of the starkest contrasts here is that all other city samples besides city number 4 tested the lowest. However, what we're seeing doesn't necessarily mean we should expect that the water next door or even 20 miles away has a similar elemental profile. Similarly to the first few elements tested, chromium registered in 3 of the 7 water samples. However, all were under 2 parts per billion, so really not much at all. Up next is copper, which is one of those elements that perks our ears as reefing hobbyists, where all 7 water samples had measurable levels of copper. Most notably was well sample number 2, where there was nearly a half a part per million copper, yet less than a mile away in well sample number 1, near the shores of the same Minneapolis lake, copper tested at undetectable levels at just 1 part per billion, and only 5 miles away in the BRS tap water, city number 1, also tested very low levels of copper, coming in at just 2 parts per billion. So it's tough to say whether these copper levels were derived directly from the water sources themselves, or if the type of plumbing may have contributed, or maybe something different altogether. The important thing to note here is that because we tested with ICP for these water sources, we are now more informed as to the levels of copper present, and regardless of proximity, it seems no 2 water sources are the same. Let's take a look at the iodine results for our water samples, where again, we see all 7 samples tested for differing levels from 0.12 parts per million at the lowest, and at the highest, we see well in city sample number 3 at or slightly above 1.5 parts per million. There were very faint amounts of lithium in nearly all water samples, with the exception of city number 4, yet still none tested above 2 parts per billion. Phosphorus was also detected in each water sample, where half tested around 1 part per million or more, some over 1.5, and way higher than what we'd like. But at the same time, there was 1 sample at 0.17 parts per million, which may not be a huge concern. Phosphorus is another one of those elements that perks our reefing hobbyist ears as being something we want to avoid from purposely adding to our tanks, and another big part of why reefers choose RO filtration to begin with. Rubidium tested under a quarter of a part per million for each sample, with well sample number 3 and city samples 3 and 4 registering as 0 or nearly undetectable, while sulfur was detected in all 7 samples, ranging from around 3 to 15 parts per million across the board. Silicon is next, which is also one of those elements like copper and phosphorus that we try to avoid in our tanks, and in this case, each water sample registered measurable levels of silicon ranging from 5.5 parts per million upwards of nearly 13.5. Silicon and silicates are some of the trickiest elements to remove from our source water, since the most effective filtration approach to remove them is directly tied to the specific type of DI resin we use. As we can see across our 7 different water source examples, there could be as much as double or nearly triple the amount of silicon present in our water within less than a 40-mile radius. To round out the remaining elements for today's experiment, thallium was present in each water sample, but none higher than 4 parts per billion. Uranium also registered in each, yet still all were measured under 6 parts per billion. Only 2 out of 7 water samples registered as having levels of tungsten at less than 3 parts per billion. And lastly, zinc was detected in 3 water samples where well in city sample number 2 were shown to have levels of 0.35 and 0.23 parts per million respectively. Answering today's question, could a $30 ICP analysis help us decide if we need a more or less aggressive RODI filtration approach for making ultra pure water for our saltwater tanks? I'll vote for a 7 out of 10 on our Reef certainty scale, because in almost all water samples we tested today, there were some obvious elements present which we actively try to avoid or remove from our tanks. And of those elements, like copper, phosphorus, and silicone, each can be reduced or removed with reverse osmosis or a more aggressive DI filtration. However, what these $30 ICP tests don't capture are those organic compounds that may be present in our tap water, such as volatile organics, pesticides, herbicides, which can also be removed with RODI filtration methods, yet may require more advanced testing to detect in your specific water source. Determining how aggressive your water filtration should be from an ICP water test can be a bit tricky, and you'll need to know what you're looking for, like silica, for instance, which can be difficult for RODI to remove without some extra thought and effort put into choosing proper filters like Pro Series DI resin configurations. What the ICP test won't tell you is if you need a better sediment filter or whether a single carbon block will be sufficient for your particular water source. This is where simply choosing the best option for both will likely be more of a benefit than choosing filters that may underperform, and the cost difference between the 2 options probably works out to be a difference of just cents per month. Although testing your water with ICP may better help you determine whether a 75 gallon per day or 100 gallon per day RO membrane would be best suited for your particular water source, since many of those elements tested can be removed by the RO membrane. So if you detect higher contaminants in your water, you'd likely be best served choosing an RO membrane with a higher rejection rate to remove them more efficiently. However, some of those elements may break through the RO membrane altogether, which is where the right choice of DI resin configuration can benefit the quality of water we produce before it goes into our tank. This is specifically true of elements like silicon or silicas, which are most benefited by a single bed Pro Resin series configuration where the anion and cation resins are utilized individually on their own, followed by a mixed bed of both for a polishing and catch-all stage. Okay, so if the most difficult to remove contaminants like ammonia and silicates are best filtered out with specific configurations of DI resin, the next question we need to know is, what is the ICP test missing? I can tell you that included in these is not just ammonia, which is present in about 50% of water supplies, but also specific forms of silica, which are definitely hard to remove. Ryan tested a handful of DI resin system configurations in this video where we found the best solution for handling some of these challenges that you'll absolutely want to see. It could change the way you make water from now on.